Good morning. Or shall I say
Morning.
afternoon? How you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing okay.
Doing extremely well, thanks, Zeddie. How are you keeping?
Yes, I am good, thank you. So, are we live? Are we ready to go live? Great. Welcome to Radical Listening Week. And Radical Listening Week was born 3 years, well, Radical Listening in the context of More Than a Moment was born 3 years ago after we witnessed the murder of George Floyd. It was really important for us to look inwards within our community to understand what the fundamental challenges were, but also to work with the sector to try and understand how to come together to really move forward based on what we know of the challenges that our community looked into. This was the fundamental core of the More Than a Moment pledge. And we've seen so much progress since we did this initial piece of work, which was actually listen to our communities to try and understand what the fundamental challenges are. And now we, 3 years on, are here to look at radical listening, but look at that from a broader perspective. Today's session, we're focusing on the Black creative workforce, and throughout the week, we're going to be focusing on different intersections to look at how we can come together to design a thriving sector that works for everyone. Hi everyone, I'm Elizabeth Zeddie Lawal. I'm part of the More Than a Moment team, and I'm the co-facilitator for today. I'm going to hand over to Reisz.
Good morning, everybody. For those who are listening and for those who are viewing, my name is Reisz Amos, also known as Priest. I am one of the creative directors of More Than a Moment, and I am here to also co-facilitate, but very excited to see and hear what's going to come out of these conversations. So yeah, very happy to be here. I shall now hand over to, Alima.
Hi, so my name is Alima, also known as AFFIEJAM, and I am a Black woman with black and green braids and facial piercings. I am a freelancer in music illustration and almost forgot hairdressing, but my expertise is in psychology. That's me.
Brilliant. And we've got the wonderful Naomi joining us.
Hi, I'm Naomi. I'm the Communications and Networks Officer at Culture Central, and I'm also at the moment studying socially engaged practice in museums and galleries. So that's a bit of where my expertise will come from as well. I'm a Black woman with short brown hair and glasses.
Amazing. And I'm Elizabeth speaking. I am a Black woman with some locks. They are curly, and I'm wearing a white shirt. Reisz, would you like to audio describe yourself?
Yeah, 100%. So I'm a Black man with a beard and mustache and cane rows at the moment, but that may change later on today.
Brilliant. And so today we are focusing on radical listening, and this session is really focused on our quest for liberation. You know, how do we create and live within a world where we can thrive when the systems around us are deeply impacting our communities? How do we create spaces for joy, for storytelling, for new narratives based on the environments that are around us? And so we've got two incredible people that are artists, creatives themselves working with us. So we're going to do a quick introduction to find out a bit more about their journeys, and we together are going to go a little bit deeper to understand actually how do we get to that point of liberation and building a beautiful and equitable and just sector based on the systems that are around us that don't seem to work. So I'm going to hand over to Alima first. Tell me a bit more about you and your journey of one before you got into the culture sector, but how you've navigated it too.
So as a child, I was very anxious and nervous about a lot of things, and especially socially, I found it hard to navigate. but through the arts, I was able to express myself in a way that felt safe and comfortable. And obviously, as you do this more and more, you get better at it, and people notice and they're like, why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? But I still found it difficult to like know how to do it, especially coming from a family where education was like the main thing. Like, you need to do good in school, you need to be educated in areas that are gonna guarantee success in the future. And so like, even though I never strayed away from being creative, I always felt like it was on the backbench. So then as I got older and I recognized how important it was, this is mainly in music, I started to get myself out there, and I still kind of find the same feeling of it's not that easy to be as successful as possible without putting your all into it. So I feel like it's always been a push and pull type thing, but it will always be there. So that's the main thing for me. And I feel like, yeah, money is a massive part of it. So to do the things that you want to do, you need the funding, and to get the funding, probably going to have to do the jobs that you don't want to do, and then how that grates on you over time. Luckily, I've got music to fall back on as something that's cathartic and therapeutic, but really and truly, like, what is it really? And we're probably going to get into that more later, but that's me.
Yeah, thank you for that, Alima. And actually, you are right. We are going to get into that a little bit more later on. Naomi, I'll just ask you now to just sort of introduce yourself, a little bit more context about what you do, and sort of the reasons why you're taking part in Radical Listening Week with us today.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it kind of links on to what Alima's been saying, that, you know, when you come from some backgrounds, often it does link into money as well, with like less privilege. As much as I've always looked at, you know, creative sectors and, you know, enjoyed them as something that I was consuming, it was never really something that I felt like I could participate in that way. So when I went to university, I was doing philosophy, and I just, I met a lot of people there that had gone there to actually study the arts, and we know were planning to, you know, be on the other side of the sector, like the other side of the gate, that never really seemed like something that I could be a part of. So I think that opened me up to it a bit more. I became more interested in music and DJing, and I think from that I was able to navigate a space where I was, you know, joining in with people who were, you know, looking at that, being a part of the sector, but I was always kind of held back, you know, in a way that I was like, okay, I'm gonna join in with the painting, I'm gonna join in with the poetry, but not really like put myself on the stage. But then I think since I've come more into the workplace, I've realized that it just needs to be a part of what I'm doing day to day. So I've been fortunate that I've been able to kind of meld my interest in the sector with the comms work that I'd already found myself doing by working with Culture Central. But I think that there's a lot of other pieces there for me that I'm trying to bring more into my day to day.
Amazing. So just my first question for you is, when you think of thriving in the culture sector, what does that look like? So, Alima.
Okay. So firstly, moving forward with authentic innovation, instead of being told to create something new or pigeonholing yourself into a pre-existing role, having the opportunity to actually make the space for yourself, and not be compared to like already successful pathways. So it's that old school thing of like, you want me to have experience to get this job, but how can I get experience without getting a job? And I often find like, oh, you've done this before, so why don't you just build on that? But what if I want to create something new and exciting? Can't I just tell you what I want instead of having to show you? And so I also feel like prioritizing research and development and seeing that as part of the process and not necessarily a pause or a hiatus, and not having the pressure to have all of these products, but being encouraged to like learn, and seeing learning and development as a thing that happens until you're on your deathbed. The other thing that I see for thriving is more of a balance between work and play. As a working class creative that is freelancing, I'm always working and my brain never turns off. There's so many jobs included in one job, and it's like you never have that moment to just be you. And I was watching something recently about adulting and like that term in general, how we use adulting as a verb, so that if we're not really good at it, it doesn't seem like a reflection of us as adults. But that is literally it. Like, adulting is wild, and you need to have breaks. You need to have access to resources that allow you to just be without feeling like a failure. Another thing as well is more of an accepting culture around boundary building. So I have an access document that I send to organizers, and oftentimes their response is like, oh, you're so organized. And like, for me, I'm just trying to get through the day. I want there to be like mutual understanding, so that when you tell me about a major change 30 seconds before it happens, and I respond in a negative way, we've already communicated why that may be, and seeing that as a standard and not, oh, she's a diva, or feeling weird about asking for basic things. So like integrating that more into the process. And so a good example is when developing your creative practice, that funding application actually includes access needs in part of it. And I'm just like, to me, that should be a standard. So in a thriving cultural sector, I would expect that to be like a really normalized thing. And then lastly, more financial sustainability through like access to financial literacy resources, and like understanding about budgeting and stuff. But just like more education around that, and it being seen as a standard as well. So yeah, those are my main points.
That's beautiful, Alima. I think we could wrap it up now and go home, to be honest with you. You've mentioned so many things in there, and they're all so valid. And I think it's very cliche of me to say, but of course, you know, the thin line between surviving and thriving, and what that looks like for us as a community, specifically as the creative workforce, the Black creative workforce. That's a very, very thin line to trod. And often some people, we have assimilated survival as thriving, just because it works and because there's momentum and continuum. So sometimes we measure our success based on normalities, and we don't necessarily accept that what we are doing is pushing the boundaries of excellence in everything that we are doing. But we've had to normalize it just in order to get into the spaces and to survive. So I think you've made some really key points there. Naomi, I'd love to throw the same question at you. You're probably going to mirror a lot that Alima said, but nonetheless, I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, no, I think that, you know, when I think about thriving in the sector, it's, you know, it's a difficult concept, because I think that people want to see, you know, Black creatives thriving in a way that's very kind of like commodifiable. And I just think that we should be able to thrive for ourselves as well. So, you know, I just think that, you know, having spaces where it's not just like, this is the top person, this is like the most excellent one, and then they can kind of like be the face of something. I think just having more spaces where you're allowed to participate and bring what you have to the table is really important, because then you can actually, you know, even those kind of spaces will allow us to expand ourselves more, rather than just feel the pressure of, you know, what I need to deliver in order to just be here and connect in some way with the things I want to be doing. It can be more honest and more genuine. And I think that it's always, I feel like it's always going to come down to, you know, pay. I think that when you're looking at access into the sector, it can be very challenging, because there'll be, schemes and things that are like helpful, but it's just when you dig down into it, it's really that there's limited spaces that you can actually say, okay, if I'm not already in the sector, this is somewhere that I can do that's not just on top of, an entire day's work, something that you can actually feed yourself with. So I think that, thriving is going to have to be, starting with the basics of, being able to provide spaces that, and you're not just expecting people to do outside of like whatever else they need to do in order to live. So.
That's really interesting. I think both of you have shared the importance of having a space for development, but also having the resources to be able to access those development opportunities. And what I mean by that is, when you're looking at finances, can you afford to sort of navigate the culture sector the way it currently is? And what does it mean to you when it comes to, balancing out, can I afford to do this opportunity, or should I pass this up because I literally cannot afford to be in that visible space? Alima, you mentioned, learning things around budgeting, around finances. Can you just tell me a bit more about why that might impact sort of your experience of the sector?
Because like when you see those funding applications, and part of the success rests on like, is it going to be sustainable? Okay, we talk about it all the time, but like, what's the practical application of that? And like, the first thing is money. Like, if what you're doing is already needed and wanted, then obviously people are going to come. But how do you allow that to like continue if you don't have the money and you don't have the education around finance? And so like, when I'm thinking about it, I'm thinking of like little workshops in primary schools, like starting off small. And if you're going to like a conference, maybe there's a little hour-long session where you take away like practical tips to apply. I hope I'm answering the question.
You are absolutely.
Yeah. But like, in my brain, I'm like, the last time I felt like a big woman was when I was in year 6 on the benches in assembly. By the time I got to uni, I was like, wow, this is meant to teach me about 60% of the rest of my life. It just doesn't make sense. So it's like starting really simple, really small, and building it up. So by the time you get to that point where you're like, you know what, I want to like set up this platform, or I want to set up this focus group, or whatever, a hiking situation where you go monthly, it's like, okay, I actually have the wherewithal to financially sustain this, so that, okay, for example, you can have free sessions or subsidized sessions, so there's more access. But yeah, that all starts with like understanding the language and stuff. So when these people are like, we're going to give you 10K, you know what to do with that 10K. You know how to make it stretch, because 10K is actually nothing. So yeah, that's where my head's at.
It's a fantastic point. And I have to say that I agree. And that kind of leads on to something that I wanted to ask from Naomi, because you kind of mentioned almost dispelling this monolithic idea about how Black people are meant to, or the Black creative workforce is meant to respond to the systems that are in place. So suppose if we were going to move forward, I'd want to ask you to think about sort of the work that you want to create and the stories that you want to tell. Who do you believe defines those narratives? And can you share any experiences of any difficulties or even success stories that you've come up against? But the real crux of the question is, who do you think is defining the narratives based on the work that you would like to create?
I think it's a really interesting question. I think that some of this is going to come from my observations, not just my own creative work in the sector. But I do think that I find that a lot of some opportunities that I see that are directed at Black people tend to be quite specifically for something that relates to our suffering, or something that relates to like hardship in the past, and how we can sort of like, you know, definitely at least in the things that I see with studying, you know, museums and galleries, that they'll look into the past, and in the past can be a painful time. But I think that, you know, the funding opportunities that are around specific projects will tend to be about like, oh, this terrible thing happened in the past, and we want to bring some people in to, you know, illuminate it and make it, you know, something that the community knows about, and you know, those kind of involvement projects are really important. But I just think that I see that as something that gets funding in a way that you don't get that same like Black specific funding for something that's not as related to, you know, struggle. So I think that's one thing that I would say can define the narratives that we then see in the sector. I mean, I think in terms of my own work, sorry, can you repeat the question? I'm trying to remember the start of it. You're on mute.
Mute. Still on mute.
What do you want?
Really? Oh, there we go. There we go. Is that better? Sorry. So just to repeat the question for you, when you think about the work that you want to create and the stories that you want to tell, who defines the narrative, and what have been your experiences of this?
So I think that in the ideal, like when I'm in an ideal space, then I would be defining the narrative of the stories that I want to tell. But I think that for me personally, I'm trying to do quite a lot of like community work and community involvement, and just making the arts and culture sector a place that is not just about, you know, a spotlight on a stage, and more about, you know, where people are being involved with things. So I think in that way, it needs to be defined by, it needs to be co-produced, it needs to be like co-designed by community groups, and it requires a lot of outreach, and it requires a lot of, you know, connecting with organizations that already exist, whether they are creative groups or not. I think that's probably the first point. I think that, you know, you can't just decide as an arts organization that you're going to connect with a group that you don't have ties to. I think wherever the actual community already is, I feel like finding those places, whether it's sort of like, you know, religious groups, whether it's sort of like, you know, health groups. I think there's some, I've forgotten what they're called now. It's Active Wellbeing Society. They do a lot of work in the West Midlands, places like that. I think that are already connected to communities is a great starting point in terms of like co-producing what people actually want to do creatively, and using that as a way of showing people the option that they can be a part of the creative sector. I feel like that would have probably changed things a lot for me in the past, just showing that there is ways to be involved, and that it is something that you can take seriously. So I think that's probably one way of like shaping narratives, rather than designing your project ahead of time and then going and trying to find people to join in with it. I
think you raised two really interesting points there. First, when you were talking about how funding then sort of informs what projects or stories come out of that funding, and that has a massive impact on, you know, what is consumed across the sector. And then there's also engagement. You know, it's how do you engage with communities based on a defined narrative, when actually maybe what does it look like to co-design at the starting point from a funding perspective and also community, so those stories can inform each other, and they do sound real and sound organic. So that's quite an interesting point to raise. And you know what, Alima, just again thinking of the points that you raised earlier around, you said that 10K wasn't a big part of funding, and it seems as if you're stepping into that space of maybe what does it look like to run an organization where I can organize within community, and so these ideas look like they're growing, but the funding available for those ideas isn't necessarily there yet because you're making that transition to the next stage. So how do we invest in our stories and our narratives, and also invest in our creatives to showcase what's possible? And that's a really exciting space to be. Reisz? But yeah, Alima, did you want to sort of respond to that, or Reisz?
Oh, I was just gonna answer about like what defines the narratives and the question. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay, so probably like the same as Naomi, like the things that end up defining like the industries. So like, can you be marketed? The consumers, the changing trends within like what your consumers want, but also the pressure to like constantly create. And then also societal pressures based on like who you are as a person and what people expect off the back of that. So being a woman, being like neurodivergent, being queer, being Black, being working class, living in Birmingham, like these are all things that feed into what people expect you to present. And I think for me, like the work that I want to do, or the work that I try to create, for me, the main thing is being recognized as a multi-potentialite and being valued for all of those different things, rightfully or accordingly. You know me as a musician, that's great. I also illustrate, I'm also a hairdresser. I've also worked in schools with neurodivergent children, and like all of these things are a part of me. And a lot of us can't just do one job to sustain ourselves. We have to branch out and do other things. But if I'm saying to you that these are like integral parts of me as a person and not just like some side hustle that I'm doing to make more money, I want you to recognize me as a whole. But there's so many of us that are like this, that almost like hide the other parts of us just so that we can be taken more seriously in the thing that we're talking about at the time. So for example, with my illustration and graphic design, I've been doing it since the age of 15. And I have a portfolio. I just haven't shared it, but I get steady work. And it's like, I felt the pressure to like build up that side of me in a way that was so extravagant, so that when I present it to you, like, oh yeah, she's actually serious about it. It shouldn't be like that. So the work that I want to create is kind of like just to show you that you can do all these things and be valued for it, but also in all of the practices, doing it in a healthy and fulfilling way. So like being a hairdresser, I want to have discussions about us culturally. I want to talk about the age-old traditions of thinking that having tight hair means neat hair, relearning about ourselves and unlearning the things that aren't, I don't want to say they're destructive, but you know, we hold a lot of sentiments that just ain't it, they're unhealthy. Even within illustration, like how I talk to my clients or how I want my clients to talk to me, how I want us to approach deadlines in a more flexible and healthy way. And also in music, not being pigeonholed into a certain genre, but being allowed to explore many different facets of like your interests and stuff. So it's like in each of those things, I want to have healthier practices, but I also want to be recognized for all those things as a whole. And yeah, so like what ends up defining it is the industry, are the consumers and the societal pressures. And like my experience of it would be a headache. Yeah.
I can totally hear that, and I empathize with everything that you said.
So.
Alima, you know I know what you mean. You know I know what you mean. I think it's interesting because as a multi-potentialist or as a multidisciplinarian or whatever, however you want to categorize it, one of the things that I've found as a barrier has been sort of like agency. and people almost don't want to touch you because you're able to do too much. And so you do find yourself forcing yourself into this little tunnel that specifies this thing about me, even though you know that you have a completely wider berth of the things that you do. And then you find yourself having to be extra, let me use the word creative. You find yourself being extra creative in order to find ties between the thing that you are outward facingly sharing and wanting everybody else to be aware of the other things that you're capable of doing. So I creep my theater into my music, and in that I then create some of my design into, so that by the time you've done this thing, what you've actually displayed is all of the skills that you have. But you displayed it using one of the particular skills as a sort of spearhead, and people don't understand how taxing that is, how much wear and tear that has on you, because you are also, and again, I'm going to use this term, and it's been very commonly used, but not being able to be your authentic self, your true authentic self, in terms of, but I do this thing and I do it just as well as I do this other thing, but you only recognize me for this one thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a video shoot, but I'm going to get actors in because I like to direct theatre, and I'm going to cook because I enjoy cooking. Do you know what I mean? So people will go, oh, this food is nice. And that's the only way you can plug the fact that you have aspirations to be a chef.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And so I think what I'd love to do from this point on then is probably speak to you both, coming to you first, Naomi, about what you think some of the common barriers have been, if you've experienced any along route, and where are the often overlooked opportunities? So what common barriers do you encounter within the sector?
So I think that like the main one that comes to mind for me first would be that when there are routes of access, they tend to be not the most intersectional. I think that in my experience, I found myself sort of like looking out for and applying for schemes that are supposed to be helping me to, you know, find spaces for myself in the sector and ways to participate. But it's, you know, for example, like I have ADHD, so, you know, it will be, when I was trying to get onto my master's, there was things that I was trying to, there was ways that I was trying to get in, and it's like, well, you know, you can, all of these things like being Black, being neurodivergent, being working class, they can be things that are qualifying you for access, but I do find that often you need to have overcome all of the other categories to get in via whichever one you're going to apply via. So for example, like, oh, you can be, you know, you can be Black, but you must have really good grades, or you can be neurodivergent, but you must have like money in order to like pay for this. And it's just like, it's not really allowing someone to just sort of, you know, show up. I think that's what it boils down to, really. So I'd say that's probably one of the main barriers, which is quite a shame, because it's just sort of like, I don't feel like that's a particularly new concept. I don't think like anyone's watching this and they're going to be like, what is intersectionality? But you know, it's just like when you actually are looking at what is available, it's just as if everybody's surprised that you can be more than one thing as a creative, but also more than one thing in terms of like, you know, your lived experience. And then in terms of overlooked opportunities, what do you mean by that?
Oh, go on, Zeddie.
I'll probably answer that question. I think if you could look at the sector for what it is, and, you know, because of certain barriers that are in front of you, it makes it difficult to, you know, realize your full potential. What is missing? Like, what is the thing that is missing, or that's been missed because of that actual barrier even getting in the first place, to really showcase, you know, your full potential? So for example, if you wanted to create a theatre production about let's say, an augmented reality theatre production on a spaceship, but actually the application form to tell you about the idea maybe is not accessible. That could be something that's missing based on that, or maybe the workforce around you doesn't necessarily understand, you know, the experience of being potentially, you know, an intersectional person, Black, working class, and therefore the programs aren't designed to accommodate for those areas as a holistic in a holistic way. So I guess that's the question, like, what is missing because of, you know, not even being able to jump over that first hurdle, or what could have been missing? Is that clear?
I think so. I think I follow it. I think that you know, I guess there's two sides to that in terms of like what could be missing for the sector with these kind of access like infrastructure not being provided. I think that you don't really get to be as experimental. I think that when I see things that are experimental, I'm still quite surprised, like pleasantly surprised. I think there was some sort of I saw something recently. I can't remember what theatre it is, which is quite bad, but I think it was touring. And there was like this, you know, it was a play about like an older Black lady, and it was like Afrofuturist, and she was trying to have like a sexual awakening. And I just like, all of this is happening in a play that's like in Birmingham city centre, and I just feel like it was a surprise to me, but I just feel like that's just very, like, there could be a lot more exciting things like that. I feel like we have to play it safe so often with what is being delivered. So I feel like in terms of like for the sector, that's something that I could say is missing from what is being produced. And I think that in terms of like what is missing for me, I'm not sure I followed, I'm sorry. I'm not sure I followed like the other side of the question in terms of what you meant by that.
It's interesting. You say you're not sure that you follow, but funnily enough, en route you already answered it. To be honest with you,
Okay.
you really did, and I know it's easy to go off with your thoughts, and then that opens up another portal to something else. But actually, en route you really did, and you highlighted some key factors. I want to go back to a comment that you made a little bit earlier on, which was and that struck a chord with me in regards to not just opportunities for the creative sector, but any other sector where there's a Black workforce, and how those kind of intersectionally cross over. I think I'd like to ask, sort of, having said that, is there anything in that inspires your practice? Is there anything in that, because I know specifically as an artist, when I get my inspiration from certain things, it's often working with people who are not in my practice, and watching, you know, some of the communities doing their due diligence in the areas and where they find their passions, and you have these conversations, and then they become relatable in some way, shape, or form, and you find this mutual language or this mutual place of understanding that just realizes that irrespective of what it is that we are doing, there has been a base place where we've had to overcome something. The thing that we've had to overcome may not be monolithic, it may not be the one thing, but that recognition in somebody else, you know, that, I mean, it starts with the nod and the awareness thing, you know, it starts from there, it stems from those things, and we create this language as a culture. And I would like to explore, like, does anything in somebody else's practice inspire you? And where do you grab your inspiration from? I'll throw that at you, Alima, actually.
Oh, crazy. It's not crazy. Still on the other question.
Well, to be fair, Alima, if you've still got things that you want to reference.
It really is just an add-on, though. I was just thinking, like, one of the main barriers is just a lack of consideration and or a lack of etiquette within I'm just going to say the industry as a whole, but when I say consideration, it might be like fees and expenses, or you know, things that make it easy for you to, like we've been talking before, just make it easy for you to actually attend the opportunity. But also, like, if there's more understanding in what someone's work is, you can then have more considerations around it for what they may need. And it doesn't have to be like access based. It can literally just be as simple as like, you're booking a singer, get them room temperature water instead of ice cold water and chocolate. It's like, just if there was just more care in that, and then that then makes it easier for people to do the opportunities. But like mainly having the space to be more innovative. So it's like what you were saying, Naomi, just seeing more experimental stuff being produced. Because I was thinking about the Fierce Festival, and I used to volunteer a lot at that festival, and I was just like blown away by how weird and wonderful performance art is, but how that can be in any piece of art, and just how we're not like encouraged to just do what we feel and think. And so yeah, we'll be able to create more authentic and meaningful work that resonates. But what inspires me, or like what informs my work, is that the question? Is literally just existing. So like, if I have a thought and a feeling, it just is what it is. And to be able to use that to create, it seems like I didn't have to work for that. Does that make sense? Like, how I feel is not a chore. It's not, I didn't have to search for that. So to be able to create off the back of that, it's like just an ever flowing like river of ideas and opportunities to make things. But I do also feel like, I don't want to say it, but I'm gonna say it, like struggle, and it like, you create so much beauty out of struggle, and people are like, oh my god, how did you even think of that? And it's like, I didn't have to think, I was just being. And then, you know, it's the solution, or it's the way to balance it out. So like, even doing psychology, like, oh, did you want to go and read minds? No, I just wanted to understand what was happening day to day. And even like with music, I started doing music because I found it hard to communicate, and it's a way to let people know what you're thinking, how you're feeling, without having to actually engage with them personally. And I would say the other things that inform my work are the people around me. So if I'm honest, like, part of the reason why I make music, as well as it being for me, is to like give back to the people that I love listening to and I love being around. It's almost like, here's a present for all of the amazing things that you've given me. So yeah, it's not a big thing that informs me. I just think it's just by existing, and I think that's kind of cool, you know. I'm finished.
That's really interesting. You know, I just really want to pick up on the term, you know, existing, the idea of existing and how that inspires you. Earlier in the conversation, you mentioned that you have all of these different parts of your identity, and you know, you're kind of in lots of different environments. For example, your hairdressing, like existing in that space might inform your music. How does your environment around you influence the either music or illustration or the stories you tell?
I think it's going back to the expectations that people constantly put on you, and just how I've never really aligned with them. That whole concept of like, oh, if you're always like telling the kid they can't do something or whatever, they're more likely to rebel. Like, if I know that I'm not an outgoing, extroverted, jump up on the stage person, and you keep telling me that that's the way that I'm going to succeed, I'm probably gonna, you know, push even harder against that. And so it's not like, oh, I don't want to be part of the status quo because I want to be different. No, we just all are different. Do you get what I mean? And that is, I don't know how else to explain it, but like just being able to do exactly what you're thinking and feeling and in that moment is what influences me. And yeah, so the more people or society or my environment makes me feel like that's not the case, the more I'm pushed towards being that way. So like even with hair, there's a very standardized way of doing things. And on the business side of things, I'm very, very diligent about how I communicate certain pieces of information, and also like the amount of research I put into things so that people have like, it's not just me saying, oh, you should do this, but like, here are some articles or here's the practical application of it. Like I'm really extra when it comes to that. But then on the other side, it's like, I want to create a space that is as comfortable as possible, that allows you to be as much of yourself in my space as possible. So like, I feel the same with music. I might have written a song about a certain topic, but if that's not how it resonates with you, that's absolutely fine. When I'm doing drawings, sometimes I'm drawing my dreams, and you're not going to see that in real life, and it's okay. And if you think it's like, you know, a little bit weird, a little bit off kilter, maybe a little bit dark, again, that's your view, and that's fine, but I'm not going to stop doing it because that's what I want to do. So yeah, my environment constantly, you know, me not aligning with it is probably what keeps me going. I'm not going to lie.
I love that. I love that, Alima, and I love the fact that you mentioned, or you nodded towards, the difference between the culture of difference and authentic differences within us. I think we do live in a society at the moment, good, bad, or ugly, where there is a culture of difference. To be seen to be different is the thing, whereas there are people who are having real, genuine lived experiences, and those differences were once things that held them back or kept them contained, or, you know, were a real barrier to them. But now that it's acceptable to be different, it almost doesn't validate the fact that you had a difference before that was an issue to the rest of the world. And so it's quite interesting where you'd have to draw your inspiration then to continue in your authentic difference, knowing now that the world looks at you and goes, it's okay to be this way now, because we've accepted you as, you know what I mean? So I reckon for you, Naomi, as well, like what actually informs your practice?
Yeah, no, I think that I would say that it kind of connects to everything that's already been said, obviously, but so I work for Culture Central part-time, and then for the rest of the week, I work with the NHS, with the children and adolescent mental health services. So I work trying to get the children and the young people who are using the inpatient services to have their voices heard more in you know, in the way that the services work. And I think that that definitely does, when I do that work, I think that I see a lot of parallels, even if it's not specifically a mental health thing, between that kind of like difference and what is allowed. And I think that that's definitely inspires some of the work that I want to do, and inspires some of the ways in which, you know, you have to ascribe where the responsibility comes for enabling voices to be heard. But I think that, like, obviously in the specifically in the area that I'm working in, we're trying to reduce admissions. So you know, we would like to think that if somebody's in the hospital, that they need to be, you know, in the hospital at least for a short period. Obviously, there's debates over whether the you know, should be hospitalization at all, and whether we have the infrastructure to do something different. But aside from that, I think that I notice a lot of the conversations that happen around when people are stepping down from that tier 4 space, where they're in the hospital, where there's conversations around, you know, elements of people's behavior, which I feel like starts to stray away from it can start to stray away from like safety into what we think someone, how we think someone should present in order to be allowed to, you know, just live their life. Like, oh, they're saying this thing or they're doing this thing, and maybe that's a concern. And I just think that, you know, once you'll get to that pace, it can be quite, you know, I think that it's just, it's a very specific area of work, but it does just reflect on, you know, society in a much greater, you know, system, that a lot of the things that, you know, a lot of the things that can be used as tools to exclude are shown as if they're a concern about somebody's capability, but I don't think that it often actually is. So I think that that's definitely something that inspires like the way that I think and approach things. And particularly working with the children and the children rather than the adolescents. I feel like there's a lot of space. I think there's more space for adolescents to participate, because I feel like people feel more comfortable engaging in that way. But then there's ways to include children and let them have, you know, share their preferences, or even if people are non-verbal, let them share their preferences. So I'm kind of straying away, but like bringing it back to, you know, this sector, I think that that does inspire my work and the way that I think and the way that I approach my course that I'm doing at the moment, and even, you know, working at Culture Central and getting to support with some of the programs that we're developing, and the way that they can be co-designed and co-produced with the people who participate. I think that it shows me that a lot of the "it has to be this way" excuses are just actually, you ask two questions and it falls apart. So I think that that's something that inspires my kind of like, you know, social engagement side of the work that I like to do. And then also just inspiring me to do my own creative work with you know, poetry or with painting. I think it's you know, it's not something that's at the forefront of my creative practice at the moment, but I feel like it just gives me more grace for myself, because, you know, you're operating, oh gosh, sorry, it's so loud outside. You're operating in a space that, you know, you're constantly being told what is, you know, what is normal and what is like stepping outside of a boundary. And I just feel like the boundary is so far from where, you know, it's you know, said that it is, or where it's being drawn. So I think that just kind of like trying to deconstruct norms in my own head, because I see the extreme of it, and it's really like, you know, if everyone's safe, then people should be able to express themselves in as many ways as possible. So I feel like that's something that I keep reminding myself of when I'm in this side of my work.
That is really interesting. I like the idea of if everyone is safe, people are allowed to express themselves as normal. So how do we create that safe space in order for us to sort of really express ourselves and thrive in the way that we should? It sounds as if we're entering a time where there's lots of questions being raised about how things have been done traditionally, and actually that it looks like there's a lot of room for innovation. How can we do things differently based on learning about the world around us, and how can that inform, you know, the future of the culture sector moving forward? So just a question, and this is the final question for all of you. You know, if we could radically redesign the culture sector, and take little components from different, you know, sectors or industries or learnings from, you know, different environments around us, what could that be? What is the potential of that, and what could that be?
I mean, I think this is very abstract in a way of a response. but the first image that comes to my mind is like, is less to do with societal structures and more to do with like, it sounds strange, but like gardening. And I feel like I've been like seeing a lot of stuff online about like natural food forests and ways that you can kind of create ecosystems that you know, aren't just sort of being rigidly maintained. I think that there's a lot of work to be done in terms of like decolonizing the structures that we have. But I think outside of that, what I'm picturing is that I think that like power imbalances that we have are not natural. So I think that they've been like ruggedly maintained. So I think that, you know, if I'm thinking of like a, you know, something that a space that is been brought together, if we could radically reshape, I think that it would just be questioning everything that is just the status quo and just not starting like 5 steps into what you assume needs to be and then like unpacking that. I think it's a bit of a you know, it's a bit of an abstract answer, but I just think that, you know, starting with other systems which have their own issues is perhaps not like something we can model from. So yeah, maybe that's my answer.
Yeah, I was probably going to say like similarly, it doesn't feel like a answer, but flexibility. I don't know, but flexibility with time, with money, with understanding, and more grace as well. It feels like, I mean, we already know what it feels like to be in a capitalist society and just be seen as like numbers and a part of a whole, but not because like we're a family, but because literally we're 2 hands and 2 feet. And just, I wish there was more flexibility. There's too much red tape. And so when I said before, like my experience of it is a headache. It's just like even deadlines and understanding what that means. So like the other day, sorry, this idea popped into my head where it was like organizations should already consider a buffer time around their deadlines so that they can always offer an extension. And even if it is common knowledge that there may be an extension, it's just like even just considering the fact that anything can cause an issue and just allowing for that flexibility. It's just like one little thing. But I thought, yeah, like most of us do need an extension and we're like handing in shoddy work or feeling like failures and we don't need to. And same with fees as well, like always factoring in like a contingency part. And yeah, but yeah, the word flexibility comes to mind in all ways. Even like the type of role you want to cast for, let that be flexible. Let it have more than one thing that you could hit or not hit and still be considered. So yeah.
I love that. I think I've said this before many a time, we talk a good community, but we very rarely exemplify it.
Mm-hmm.
We speak about what the principles of ecosystems that would work to our benefit would look like, and then we don't actually put them into place always. Now, that's not to say that there are organizations that are currently trying to make that work, but I think there has to be a broader and wider awakening across the sector to understand exactly how these ecosystems can link with each other to create chains of ecosystem that are literally like on a rotary basis. And I was watching a documentary about early 80s Botswana last night, and the president at the time, Karma, they'd found some diamonds in a specific region of Botswana, and that specific region belonged to a specific tribe, but they made a notion as a nation to say that those diamonds belong to everybody in Botswana, and they used that funding, the money that came from that, to put free education up until PhD in place, free school meals for all the young people, and also free health service. Now, just that as an understanding, that kind of stepping yourself back and humbling yourself and realizing, okay, it was found here, and these people have a claim on it, but we're looking at ourselves as an entity, as a fuller ecosystem, what can benefit the actual culture of everything moving forward. So when those reserves are done, we can still turn around and say our people were trained and educated because of the resources that we had internally. And I think that was just an absolute microcosm of exactly what we're talking about here, you know, and something that can really shift the way that the systemic practices that are in place can be kind of pulled down and restructured to help us get what we need out of it.
Brilliant. I think there's lots to take away from here. One is that, you know, there's so much room for innovation. Two, let's think about the communities that we aim to serve and design around that. Recognizing that actually there are so many intersections within an intersections and within one intersection. So how do you accommodate for that? We need to spend more time listening to each other, caring for each other, and nurturing and crafting spaces for that. But then there's also some structural things, such as, you know, the funding that's available, you know, the economics behind an opportunity, and actually factoring in that, you know, it's really expensive to even get to an opportunity, let alone you know, try to thrive with once that opportunity has been found. So there's lots of takeaways from this. But yes, this concludes Radical Listening Week, and thank you so much to wonderful Naomi, Alima, and Reisz for joining us, and thank you all for coming along.